Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Engage 2024. I hope yesterday went well for you. This session is called There's a World Outside My Claris FileMaker Window, the 2022 version. My name is Steve Winter. I'm a former school teacher, a science educator. A lot of what I do these days focuses on FileMaker integrations, predominantly web development, but a lot of other systems integrations with FileMaker as well. We were just talking down the front here. I did a cycle tour. I said I was a long-distance cyclist. The longest tour I did was from Beijing to Istanbul, which is about 9,500 miles. It took 5 months.
It was really only 5 months.
Only 5 months. This photo was the next crazy cycle tour I did, which was from Casablanca in Morocco to Accra in Ghana. That's a relatively short 3,000 miles and only took 2.5 months.
You can take a boat, you know.
Yeah, you can also fly. So I spoke about integrations at DevCon in 2017, and the use of APIs in FileMaker was kind of really just beginning at that point. With the release of FileMaker 16, we got a significant step forward in terms of the capabilities of the insert from URL script stack, because it exposed more of the underlying curl library that was used, and it let us specify curl options. Jump forward 6 years to today, and the landscape's changed significantly. Integration's even more prevalent. Pretty much any FileMaker solution at all is integrating with at least one external thing by some means or another. And the thing that's really changed from the FileMaker perspective is Claris Connect, because of its capabilities and its tight coupling with FileMaker. Today, we're going to have a look at what APIs are. We're going to look at using an existing Claris Connect connector. We're going to write a custom Claris Connect connector. And that's the bit that has really expanded the capabilities of Connect. Connect was able to do a ton of things, but the fact that we can now write our own connectors really does make it even easier. And then right at the end, we're going to have a look at how we can still use the insert from URL script step that my previous session was all about to do things that we still can't do with Connect for one reason or another. So let's just start with a quick overview about what APIs are. API stands for an application programming interface. As it says here, an application programming interface is a way for 2 or more computer programs to communicate with each other. It's a type of software interface offering a service to another piece of software. So essentially, it's a way in which 2 systems can communicate with each other. When we're talking about APIs in the sense of FileMaker, we're talking about interacting with remote systems. There are a number of different styles of API. One of the original ideas with APIs was this concept called a remote procedure call, which is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. It was a way that you could call a procedure in a remote system. One of the issues with RPC was that everyone had their own ideas about how it should work and how it should be implemented, so they were often quite difficult to work with. Thankfully, RPC is kind of out of favor, although really all we're doing is we're still doing RPC. We've just put a whole series of wrappers and layers on top of it. In an attempt to standardize things, this idea called SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, came along. It's an XML-based approach, and it places a standard wrapper around the payload, and it provides something called a WSDL, a Web Services Description Language, which defines the calls that you can make in that system. Conceptually, it was a great approach because it was really consistent in the way in which it was describing everything. But there were a couple of issues of it. For one, it wasn't really that simple. It was actually quite complex to use at times. And really, it had nothing to do with objects. It really was just a wrapper around RPC. And so it ended up being, well, something else. Next up, we got to REST. REST stands for a representational state transfer. Now, REST is way more than APIs. it's an architectural style that kind of influences the way in which everything about it is done. But we often end up talking about APIs which are RESTful, which basically means that they follow that architectural style. And this is the bit we're concerned with when we use HTTP with a remote system according to a bunch of rules. We're going to come back to REST shortly because most of the session is about REST, and most APIs that we interact with are RESTful, which is thankfully quite helpful. The last one I'm going to mention is called GraphQL. I'm just mentioning it briefly, and you can kind of think of it as a layer on top of REST. With REST, you use URLs to specify endpoints where actions can occur or data can be retrieved. For example, if you were using an API to get details about a customer, you might use the /customer endpoint, and you might ask for customer number 57 by adding the ID to the end. Now, with a RESTful API, you'd get details about that customer back. If you then wanted to get the invoices that had been issued to that customer, you would probably use the invoices endpoint and perform a query where customer ID equals 57. Similarly, if you wanted the orders they placed, you do the same thing. Use the order endpoint with customer equals 57. The idea with GraphQL is that you can combine those queries into one, and you can actually specify what information you're wanting to get back. So when you perform your request against the customer endpoint, you can say, I want the customer details, but I also want the related data that goes with it. GraphQL flew into the scene. It was going to replace every API you'd have ever heard of around about the time that the schemaless databases became very popular. That GraphQL has sort of faded a little bit over the years, recent years, because people realized that actually databases generally do have a schema and that they are structured. And so when you're trying to get structured data from a schema-based database into that GraphQL type style, it becomes quite complex to implement. I said we were going to come back and talk more about REST, and that's pretty much where we're going from here. All of this session now focuses on RESTful APIs. And the reason for that is they're the ones that you're going to come across, the ones that we're going to interact with on a regular basis. There's a direct mapping between the HTTP verbs or actions and CRUD with REST. Basically, when we do a post, that means we are creating something. So for example, if we were using an API to create an order, we would post to the create or /order endpoint. If we wanted to get data, that's our read in CRUD. So we would say the order endpoint and the ID of the order that we are interested in. When we do a patch, we use that to update that order in the remote system. Sometimes you might see put used when you're working with APIs. Some APIs will use put. When you look at what these verbs technically mean, put's kind of the right thing if you want to replace the whole order. With patch, you're generally just changing one or more fields in that order, whereas put would completely replace the order. Sometimes you will also see post being used with APIs, and that's kind of a bit of a, post used to update. That's kind of a bit of a legacy of the way in which a browser only has access to get and post. And so it's a way that browsers can be used to interact with endpoints in that way. And the last one's fairly obvious. Delete does what it says on the tin, and it deletes. A well-defined endpoint API, the endpoints will follow the same pattern, and the different behavior is purely determined by that HTTP verb itself. Two of those, post and patch, you need to send payload which includes the requested data. This can come in many forms. It could be plain text with key value pairs, which is often what a browser will use. It's less common in APIs. For a long time, particularly around the SOAP period of API evolution, XML was the most common and often the only format that was supported. For all its haters, a former colleague in the UK used to refer to dealing with XML like chewing on razor blades. XML is actually a really robust option because of the ability to validate the payload that you're about to send against a schema. These days, pretty much all APIs that you interact with are going to offer JSON, either as an option that you can use, or more commonly, just the only option that you can send. Your payload is going to be sent as the request body. As I've said, it might be plain text, it might be XML, it might be JSON. In terms of the response format, what you get back, you may well get a fixed response based on the API. Many APIs will simply say, use JSON, send us JSON, we'll send you JSON back. Sometimes you can set a header, an accepts header in your request and say, I would like to get XML, or I would like to get JSON. You can see in the payloads that if you wanted to get text, if you wanted to get XML, the accept header you'd send would be text/XML. If you wanted to get JSON, you'd send application JSON as your accept header. Sometimes you can actually use a URL parameter to specify the format that you'd like to receive back. It may be often it will use underscore, and you might be underscore format equals, and you can say JSON or XML. Twitter is full of tweets. Well, sorry, X is full of posts. That's what we have these days. Of posts like this. Oh goody, another API that returns 200 OK and the error message in the body. The HTTP response codes that we get back are really important. And APIs that do this drive people nuts, because if you're looking at the response code, you expect it to tell you what's happened. There are 5 categories or groups of response codes. The 100 codes, basically, they're largely irrelevant for what we're doing, but they tell systems either 100 continue, we may see, and we may see 101 switch protocols, which means that we don't want to use HTTP anymore. Now, that's not going to be very helpful for us, so hopefully we're not going to see that anywhere. The 200 category codes basically tell us that everything's okay. 200 is just literally okay. We get 201, which is created. Now, often APIs will use 201 created to say, I've got your record and I've created it. They may also use 202, which is accepted. Now, there's a little bit of a subtle difference between accepted. Accepted says, I've got your stuff, but it doesn't necessarily say that it's done anything with it. But sometimes we will see 202 as a successful response. The last one that we often get with the delete command is 204. And 204 is a code that means no content. It basically means that there is nothing to say, which is kind of what you'd expect. If you were deleting an endpoint, you want to know it happened, so we get a success response code, but we don't get any body back. If you're using a delete endpoint in insert from URL in FileMaker, that will often lead to a false error code, because insert from URL always expects to get something in the body. So when you get a 204 and no content, you end up with an error 10 in FileMaker, which also means no content. But that was what we wanted. So you just need to, if you're using insert from URL, you just need to watch for that little trap. The 300 ones are all about redirection. 301 means that it's moved permanently. That means that the URL you're calling no longer exists. And returned with that will be the new location. 302 used to be called moved temporarily, but is now just renamed as found. And again, it means that the URL you're calling isn't exactly where you thought it was. This will often happen if you call an endpoint with HTTP, but it actually wants you to use HTTPS. Because what will happen is you will call that at HTTP, it will issue a 302 found and then redirect to the HTTPS version. The 400 categories basically mean you screwed up. 400 is a bad request. You'll often get bad requests as a response if the payload that you're sending fails validation. It's a very common way in which 400 gets returned. 401 is labeled as unauthorized. 403 goes quite closely with 401 unauthorized, and it means forbidden. Now, interestingly, unauthorized probably really means unauthenticated, but it's called unauthorized. Unauthorized or unauthenticated means I don't know who you are. You need to tell me who you are so that I can determine whether you're allowed to access this endpoint. 403 really means unauthorized because it means I know who you are, but I ain't letting you in. So 401 and 403, I've seen lots of endpoints on APIs that get that wrong. They will tell you 401 all the time, or they'll tell you 403 all the time, irrespective of what they actually mean. But both of those basically mean either you're not logged in, I don't like you, but go away. 404, not found. You'd be used to that, seeing that in browsers. In my example before, I said you had the order endpoint where you had /order and then the ID on the end. If you asked for order 57 and it didn't exist, you'd expect to get a 404 not found error back. The last one I mentioned, there really is a status code 418, and it really does mean I am a teapot. It started as an April Fool's Day joke from an engineer at IBM, I want to say, but it just kind of stuck. I've never seen an API that returns a 418. But
I've got to think what now to do with it.
yeah, someone's going to build one, I'm sure. The last category of errors are the 500 categories, and they basically mean we screwed up. So when I said the 400 was you screwed up, it was you calling the API. The 500s we screwed up, I am the API, and something went wrong. And the most common one you're going to see is at 500, which is just basically an internal server error. Many APIs use that as their fallback for something's gone wrong. We don't know what, can't fix it. Bad gateway, you may see if the API you're calling is using something like AWS's API gateway, where basically it's a proxying type system, which receives the message, it tries to call an upstream system, but it can't find it. 503 service unavailable can often be used in maintenance periods. So for example, if an API is offline for some reason, it may well return a 503. There's a whole load more, but these are the common ones and the ones that we're likely to run into when we're working with insert from URL and FileMaker. What can APIs do? Anything. Anything and everything. If you can imagine it, there's almost certainly an API out there somewhere that you're going to be able to do whatever it is that you want to add with. To do. When I'm choosing APIs, when I'm looking at APIs in a particular category, there are some questions that I ask when I'm thinking about which one of the myriad that do that thing am I going to choose. How complete is the API? Does it have all of the functionality that I need? How stable is the API? How reputable is the company that produces it? How easy is the authentication? Do they offer webhooks as callbacks? Even how good is the API documentation? There have been times when I have particularly chosen an API because of its documentation. There's a very well-known shipping provider in the UK who I do anything I can not to use their API because their documentation is rubbish. Worse than rubbish because it's wrong in places. So which one you choose if you want to do anything often comes down to what your client wants you to use or what your business partner has selected for your company. But if you can, think about the things that determine how successful you're likely to be and how easy your integration is going to be. I mentioned at the outset that the times have changed significantly since 2007 team when I sort of started this journey. And Claris Connect has been one of the ones that's really made a significant difference. So we're going to spend some time now taking a look at Claris Connect and at the APIs that we can interact with there. Claris Connect refers to itself as being workflow automation for integrating apps. The idea with Connect is that you start with a trigger and then you use a series of actions to create a flow. In this example, when you receive a signed contract from DocuSign, so that's your trigger, automatically update a win in Pipedrive, instantly upload the contract to Dropbox, and let your team know through Slack that you closed the deal. There are connectors for a ton of different services. Use connectors to book flows. So in Claris Connect, there are a ton of different services that you can interact with. We've got them all here. Lots of very common and popular APIs that you might want to interact with. For the majority of us, you also then get a series of tools that we can use. And then for the majority of us, there's the Claris apps, which is the ones that are going to be of interest to us. The first one is for interacting with FileMaker Cloud. The second one is Claris FileMaker Server. The third one there says it's server on-premise, but that's somewhat misleading in its labeling. What that means is that it's on-premise and behind a firewall. And so that on-premise allows you to install essentially a proxy server onto your FileMaker server so that you can still access Claris Connect flow. Claris Connect can still access your FileMaker server even when it's behind a firewall. And then the last one there is the Claris server. What did you call it, Clay? The stepchild? What was it?
Yeah.
Claris.
Yeah.
Claris server is gone or very soon going away. But however, it's still kept in Claris Connect for compatibility for those that were using it. One thing to be aware of when connecting to a FileMaker server is that you have to have the data API enabled because that's how Claris Connect interacts with FileMaker server. Yesterday in my session, I was talking about webhooks, and we were talking about selling an item in WooCommerce and using a webhook callback to access our FileMaker solution. So I'm going to continue with that story today, and we're selling an item through WooCommerce, and we want to WooCommerce is using a webhook to update FileMaker, and then we want to send a notification to Slack to let the dispatch team know that the order is there and they need to start processing it. Okay, so let's jump out of here. Let's swap to there. If we ignore my puppy for a minute, we'll come back to there. So I'm now logged into Claris Connect. And when you start with Claris Connect, this is exactly what you get, a blank screen. The first thing I need to do, however, is I'm going to just jump over to Slack here. This is an internal Slack, and I'm just going to create a new channel in here. I'm going to call it orders because that's the channel that I want to send to. I'm going to make this a public channel. With Claris Connect integrations, you can use private channels. However, it's a little trickier to do. So I'm just going to make this a public channel so that we can always come back to it. So I've got my channel set up now. I want in all of the orders that are received to come through into here. Claris Connect is organized around the concept of projects. So I'm going to begin by creating a new project. I can label my project up here. And you can see here that I've got the idea of flows, approvals, and webhooks. So because we have already got our order coming into FileMaker, what I need to do is to begin with a flow. I'm going to create my flow. Now you can see here that we've got all of the different connector options that exist in Claris Connect, you can see that many of them at this point are grayed out. And that's because they can't act as a trigger. They can be an action in our flow, but they can't be something that triggers a flow. I'm going to choose FileMaker Server, and I'm going to trigger this flow in Connect using the script. I select Continue, and it asks me to sign in to my server. Server URL. I'm just going to use my webhook account because I know that has the data API enabled using my secret super secure password, and I'm working in the database called inventory. When I click sign in, Claris Connect is now doing an API call to the FileMaker server data API to ensure that those credentials are valid. It's come back and told me success. So I've signed in. When I click continue, it now tells me that it's generated a URL, which it gives me at the bottom here, and that I need to follow some steps in FileMaker, basically to tell Claris Connect that I'm here and that I really do want to connect. I'm going to hop over to here, and I'm going to jump into order, and I'm going to make it a script. In FileMaker, we have a script step called Trigger Claris Connect Flow. And if I click on here, I get the URL box, and I paste in my URL, and I go OK. And you can see I've got the Monkey Bread plugin installed here, and it's gone red because it's telling me that that isn't valid. However, if I run the script and then return to Claris Connect, you can see that it's giving me a success message. So it's actually been able to connect and make the call. If I just pop back to here, we can see that if I choose the unknown flow, at present it shows that there are no flows. And that's simply because at this point I have yet to enable this flow. Later on, once I've enabled the flow, we'll be able to come back in here and see that that flow does exist in my project. This window shows up because I am logged in with my same Claris ID in both FileMaker and in Claris Connect. Actually, while we're here, what we'll do is we'll just get set up with some JSON data to pass to our flow. What we'll do is we'll do a JSON set element, and we'll just start off with some empty JSON here. What I want to do is I want to send a message that we can say a new order has been placed. Okay, and we'll just prepare for the future by saying that it has a value. If we hop over to our order table, where's that field gone? Okay, I've confused myself here. Let's just... Okay. Oops. What have I done wrong?
Semicolons. Semicolon after that.
Yeah, there we go.
No, one more. No, one more.
But wait, there's more.
First line.
Off the book, first line.
There, thank you. Okay, so we'll save that, and we'll just run that script. If we hop back over to Claris Connect, here we go. So we've now got our trigger set up, and so that is what's going to make our flow work. When I choose action, I get all of the available actions come up here. And there are, as I was saying before, there are myriad different actions that we can perform. In this simple scenario, we want to use Slack. So I'm just going to choose Slack. You can see here that there are a number of different things that we can do in our integration with Slack. We've got 6 there. If anyone's familiar with the Slack API, you'll know that there are actually a lot more things that the API offers, but these are the ones which have been implemented for us by Claris Connect. If we wanted to, we can then extend that using the custom connectors, which we'll come to shortly. I'm just going to continue here. The next thing that I need to do is I need to sign in to Slack. I am already signed into Slack on this machine. We can see here that I've got several workspaces that are open and signed in. I'm going to choose the Matero Solutions one. And you can see here that it's asking for the different permissions. It's telling me what it is that I'm giving Claris Connect the ability to do. When I go allow, we are now signed in and I can continue. You can see here that we've got a drop down that shows the channels that I can post to. Now, I mentioned before that it is possible to post to private channels. However, they don't appear in this list. It is possible to type the name of a channel into this field by typing a custom value. However, if you do that, every time you edit this step, it will disappear. So just something to be conscious of. If you do choose to use a private channel, you can, but when you edit the flow, you will end up having to retype it each time. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go choose my orders channel, and then I can send a message in there. From here, I can see steps that have happened in my flow prior to the one that I'm currently on. From there, I can see the response body, and so I can choose from the data that I'm sending what it is that I want to transmit through. So this was the message that I set in my JSON object that I passed through in my script parameter. Okay, and if I save that, then we should be all good to go. I'm going to enable this flow. Over in my FileMaker solution, now that I've got my flow all set up, in my webhook receiving script, down the bottom here, we're just going to perform a script, and we want to perform the script called, what did I call it? What did I?
It's down in Dropbox.
Call Connect.
It's Dropbox. Yeah. It's in the Dropbox. Down in the Dropbox area.
Down in the Dropbox area. Call Connect. There it is. I'm not sure why it's there. Okay. So this was the script that is being called by my webhook. And at the point at which that concludes, I want to send my Slack notification. Maybe we should just test this out. Let's get ourselves into the context of an order. This one, and if we hit play on that script, we get a Claris Connect error. That's unfortunate. Let's jump over to Claris Connect, and in the History tab, no flow history. Select it. I haven't got the flow selected. Right. It's called Untitled because I didn't enable it. Okay. Still getting the Claris Connect.
You didn't save yours.
I didn't save my script. Yeah, I did save the script. Select, play, save on. 3HHZ WP. Okay, any clues, any pointers, anybody? Target. We're expecting to get okay in that target. Claris connector. Okay, what I'm going to do is just grab this. Let's just try this script. Except that flow doesn't exist anymore.
Is it because it doesn't have a product value?
Okay, that worked slightly better. Okay, so we've now been able to trigger our flow, and we can see here that we've got the history of the flows that are being triggered. Now, this is quite a common error when you create a Slack channel after you've authenticated Claris Connect with Slack. Okay, it tells you that you're not in the channel. In order to resolve that, if I hop back over to Slack, what I can do is I can invite someone into this channel. Oops, sorry. I can invite Claris Connect as an app. And I can do that because Claris Connect, when I was signing into Slack in Claris Connect, it registered the app in my Slack account. And so Claris Connect is now a user effectively in my channel. So if I invite Claris Connect has joined, if we go back to FileMaker now and run my script, then we will still get an error message. Did I run the correct script? 13 seconds ago. No text. Okay, so let's inspect this. My request is sending through a message which has an error in it. All right, if I go back to edit my flow, make sure that we've got the right thing in here. Step 1, body message. History. Success. Slack. A new order has a JSON error in it. My new order has a JSON error in it because I'm not passing a script parameter that I need. And that's because that script parameter comes when I call it properly. Let's try this from the perspective of my store. Oops. This was my demo store. I'm selling a couple of quite modern FileMaker products here. FileMaker Server, some of you will have heard me say yesterday, was my favorite version of FileMaker Server for many, many years because it was the last one in a long while that supported Linux. And then sometime recently we got that back again. Just going to quickly check out and place my order and hope that yesterday's the last webhook I used yesterday is still configured correctly. And let's take a look in Slack. I didn't get a new order either, so I must have had my webhook incorrectly configured. Yep, I'm also logged out of here. It's still correctly configured. Okay, I'm going to move on. We'll come back to this momentarily. So Claris recognized that although they had built a number of integrations that became possible in Claris Connect, they weren't going to be able to support every API that was out there. As we discussed, there are literally tens of thousands of them. So they focused the development work on some of the ones that were going to get used most frequently. For quite a while, if the API you wanted to integrate with wasn't supported, then unfortunately you were out of luck. Partway through last year, they released the ability to create custom connectors, which opened the door to connect to all of other APIs that you wanted to. So how does it work? Basically, Claris Connect connectors are written in JSON. There is a defined schema for them. It's definitely not no code. Claris Connect custom connectors are very much a code solution to a problem. They only become available within your team, but because they're JSON, they're actually quite easy to share because you can write the JSON, copy the JSON, and move them from team to team. And once published, they can't be edited. So you can create a custom function, you can use a custom connector, you can use that custom connector, but once they're edited, there's no way to, once they're published, you can't edit them again. But of course, you can create a new one, copy the code, start again, and then publish the new one. You might be wondering, if you do need to write code in Claris Connect, why wouldn't we just write it in FileMaker scripting instead? And I guess that really depends on your use case. If you're having to integrate with custom connector, it means that it can be integrated in multiple different flows and used in different ways, including those which don't necessarily involve interaction with FileMaker. At this point, if I'm being honest, the documentation for writing Claris connectors could best be described as sparse. If it were on the list of APIs to choose, I wouldn't be choosing it for its documentation. And in places it's not really clear, but the editor does a really good job of trying to help you out. Now, in my message before, I was wanting to show the value, but I'd lost my field. So what I want to do is I'm going to write a Claris Connect custom connector that interacts with an exchange rate converter so that I can convert the value of my invoice to my order to go into the message that's being sent to Slack. The exchange rate converter that I've chosen has a very simple sort of an API. And one of the things that you need when creating a custom connector is that you need a simple endpoint that you can retrieve with a GET request that requires minimal configuration. So they have this endpoint here, which gives you just the latest rates endpoint, and all you need to do is give it the API key. The purpose of this is to confirm that your authentication is working as you're building your Claris Connect connector. The convert endpoint, you can see, requires the API key, and then it needs fields to show what you're converting, currency you're converting from and to, and the amount that you wish to convert. Back in Claris Connect, you can see that we have the custom connectors option. When we choose to create a new connector, then we have some samples that can be used. I mentioned before that the Slack API integration that Claris Connect has already done doesn't offer all of the endpoints. But here you can see that we have a range of existing Claris Connect connectors that we can use as templates to then extend to add more of the endpoints that that API might offer. By default, our new custom connector comes with much of what I would call the boilerplate in place. It's got the schema ready for us. The first item in here is the schema, and it's this version of the schema. At this point, there is only one, and it is one. So we can just leave that line fully alone. We give our connector a name, and this is the name which will appear in the list of flow steps that are available. you can see here that the editor is doing a lot of, it's color coding, it's doing nice indenting for us, and I said that it is using the schema. You can see that when I hover my mouse over here, it gives us a little tooltip, a little bit of a hint as to what it is that this element in the JSON that we're using to define our connector is for. Right, so convert the order value from USD to New Zealand dollars. Okay. The next block here we have is called required fields. And the first one in there is the auth settings. So basically, this is what will appear on the form for users when they are setting up their connector in the flow. So basically, what do we want this field to be called? I'm going to call it API key, because that's what the documentation asks for. The documentation says, give me your API key. So just pop that in there. A brief description. So we'll write this in here. Get your API key from exchange rate data. Okay. And then we give it a key. If you think about a form field on a web page, this is the name of the field, essentially. So I'm going to call it API key. And its masked is true. If we hover here, you can see it gives us a little bit of a hint whether it will be masked to hide sensitive information. So I'm going to leave that set as masked. So basically, these are the required settings. What do we have to have in order to use this connector? And the only thing that we need for this one is a single key. You can see here that this is an array. With some endpoints, you may have to gather multiple pieces of information in order to create a connection to it. So basically, you can add more fields in here simply by copying and pasting that. The editor does quite a good job of helping us know what we need to do. For example, if I delete that key, you can see here that I've got this red box over there to tell me that there is a problem. And I've got this red squiggly line just below the brace. If I hover over that, it pops up and it tells me that within this object, I have to have a value called key, a property called key. So it does try to help to guide us in the data that we need to populate in here. Auth components, the other way that it does that is that you can see that, again, if I delete that value, it's given me the red squiggly line. And if I hover again, it tells me that what the options for the values that go in there are. So it's validating that I've got the right auth type in here. You can see that the value must be OAuth2. Actually, I'm not going to use OAuth2. I'm just going to put that back to none. So what that's telling me is that I can either have no auth component or I can use OAuth2. OAuth2 is one of the most common API integration methods. It's also quite complex, which is why I chose not to do that today. Okay, so I just need to... Okay, so you can see here that coming on further down, we have our auth request. And there are a number of different types. Right now, the type is set to none. Again, if I delete that and hover, you can see that it tells me what types of authentication does Claris Connect support. You can see basic auth, bearer, custom, custom body, custom headers, custom query, or none. So in our case, for this API, it's a custom query. And the reason it's a custom query is because we want to include our API key as a query parameter. Now, having set that type to custom query, you can see that it's giving me another clue that this auth request is missing some things. It's telling me that it's missing a property called query parameters. You can also see that as I start to add a new property, it tells me which properties I could put here. And so it gives me some auto-completion of the property that I want. it knows that query parameters is an object. So as soon as I've created it, it puts the curly braces in there for me. So what do I need to my query parameter? In the documentation, it told me that I needed to pass a query parameter called access key. And what do I want my access key to be? I want my access key to be the key that the person who's filling out my connector, configuring my connector, put in the field up here, in my auth field API key. So what we do is we use a pair of curly braces. What do we call these in America, these things? These curly braces? Okay, cool. Just checking. And so basically what I can do is I can refer to other parts of my configuration, because I can say that I want to use all fields and I want to use the API key. Okay? So basically what that's going to do is it's going to take whatever value is entered into the auth field API key, and it's going to set a query parameter called access key with that. Okay? The next thing down here that we need to do is we need to configure some endpoints. We need to configure the endpoints in our API that we want to use. So, we know that to get the latest rates from our endpoint, we want to use the /latest endpoint, and we need to say where is that endpoint, and it's at https API dot exchange rate API dot io, and it's at version 1, and I finished up with a trailing slash. So that's our endpoint that we can get. It's where it is, and it tells us what to do. For now, we're just going to leave actions as it is. We'll come back to that shortly. Down the bottom here, you can see that there is this thing called a test connection, and it wants to know which endpoint are we going to use to test our connection, to confirm that our API key is valid. And so basically, I've called this one latest, so I need to put this as latest in here. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to click Save and Test and have a look at how I'm going. You can see here that we have the authentication, and it's asking me to sign in. This is the API key label that I created. This is my message to say, get your API key from Exchange Rate Converter, and we need to pop our API key in there. Now, because I don't want to have to type a very long and convoluted thing, needs to find my key, which is here, and pop that into here, and we go test. And
there's an error in that set of JSON you made. You have off field, and it should be off fields plural, like line 21, 22 here.
Thank you.
On that same thing, Steve, should you be pointing at auth fields key, not API key? Sorry, back in the JSON.
Yeah.
Should that be auth fields dot key?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. The API key is the value.
Not API. Yeah.
The key is here.
Should it just be the word key?
No, it shouldn't just be the word key. Because the key, this is the key. What is the key? The key is API key.
Yeah, but you're referencing the
That's the field that you're trying to grab. That's the value. API key is the value.
Yeah, that's correct. Please double check yours and try again. So it is connecting, it's giving a 400 error, which means bad request. Oops.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Change line 21 to key, dot key instead of.
I assure you that that is correct. Like that, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just make sure I've got the right key. No.
So request, try again.
This is unhelpful in the extreme. Have I? We might just do.
You need a teapot response.
I need a teapot response. Yeah. Let's just make sure I've got the right URL in here. That changed, didn't it?
Yeah.
Let's hope it's just my dodgy typing. That was the problem. Huzzah! Okay. Thank you for your assistance. So basically what this is doing is it's proving that my authentication is working, which is what I needed to do. And so we can now move on. The next thing that we want to do is that we want to add in a new endpoint that will allow us to do our conversion. So basically what we do is we come here, I'm going to copy this so that I don't fat finger type it again. We want to use the endpoint which is called convert. And you can see that the URL remains the same. And that's because basically what that's doing is Claris Connect combines the value that is here as the key with the value which is the URL in order to form the complete URL. Now, in my actions, this is where we can create the actions that our connector can perform. Again, you can see that it's an array of objects. Let's start by saying that the model ID is convert, because that's what we want to do. The action ID, we're going to also call convert. The endpoint that we want to use is called, you got it, convert. The method that we want to use is get. What is the label that we want? We want to convert currency. And the help desk, what does this action do? Converts currency. Now you can see here that we can now set up a series of fields that we can use in order to get the data that our connector is going to need. So we start off with a key which we're going to call from. What label do we want to give that? We want to convert from currency, and description in here, starting currency, that's the type, and it's required. And I've just looked at the time and realized I've got 2 minutes to go.
They say you have to stop after 1 hour? Just saying.
Yeah, they do say that. So I am going to have to stop after 1 hour. But you can see here that I've now got my field in place. And if I add a value in here and try to test that action, then it's going to fail because the API is going to tell me that I have not entered an invalid from currency and I am missing a parameter because I didn't complete my connector. I'm going to have to switch back over to my slides and carry on through. When won't Claris Connect work? Claris Connect won't work with APIs which aren't RESTful. It won't work with APIs which support unsupported authentication schemas and APIs that don't return JSON or XML. Situations where you can't send data to third parties, can't send data outside of a geography, or are making tens of thousands of calls are probably times when you wouldn't want to consider using Claris Connect. And then, of course, insert from URL comes to the rescue. It's been there for several versions now, and it's under the hood as curl. FileMaker 13 introduced HTTP and HTTP post, and since 16 we've had a very broad range of curl capabilities that you can specify in the curl request. And then one example that I wanted to use was to show an upload of container content to Dropbox. Now the reason that I was doing that is that Claris Connect does have a connector for that. However, it only supports a URL upload. But if we've got our content in a container and we want to get it there, we can't use Claris Connect for that. But we can use insert from URL to call the API. Back in FileMaker, I have a script here which sends the contents of a container to the API. And you can see in this line that I am setting a number of headers of curl options. And these curl options allow us to specify the type of authentication that we're using, to send some data in an API arguments header, which is what is required by the Dropbox API, and to say that we are sending an octet stream as our application type. So we are sending binary data, and in order to access containers data, we can use the ampersand and a variable to say where our data has come from. If I hop over to my inventory layout, we can see here that I've got my lovely picture of my favorite Claris FileMaker Pro version from many years ago. Over here in Dropbox, this is the Dropbox account that we're signed in with. That's my puppy when he was a puppy. He's now a very large dog. If I hit upload here, we're going to run that script that is in the background here. We're going to get a little spinning beach ball of joy. And if we look over here in Dropbox, we can see that my image has now uploaded as the most recently uploaded image in Dropbox. Yay!
I'll make sure.
Oops. Dropbox upload. So this has been There's a World Outside My Claris FileMaker window, the 2024 version. API integration is part of pretty much every solution in 2024. Claris Connect provides a no-code access to many of the most popular APIs. Custom connectors expand that to many other APIs. And insert from URL provides the ultimate fallback to API integration. With -3 minutes, I'm going to have to take questions in the corridor, but thank you very much for coming along.